All right, and now please welcome Mark Jarman.
Thank you. Welcome to Evensong. How many people grew up going to church every night on Sunday? Good. Well, welcome to Vespers. I want to thank, of course, Megan and Gwen and Adam and both Adams and everyone. I am excited for Leah Stewart that she will be taking stewardship of this conference. I think she will do a marvelous job. Once again, I get to work with the amazing Alicia Stallings. To listen to her talk about poetry is just a pleasure, just a pleasure. And our class is marvelous too. And I want to thank Wyatt and Barbara. And I'm going to thank them by telling a story of their charity and generosity and hospitality. In October of 1990, a Sunday, I was coming back from a writers' conference in Chattanooga with a friend whom I had to get to the airport. And my car broke down just short of the Mont Eagle truck plaza. The timing chain broke. It was a Chevette. Remember them? About a month before that, we had returned from being a year in England, where I taught at the University of Leeds, and I'd given Wyatt a call, and he told me about the conference, but what he said he was very excited about the fact that he said, guess what? I fly now. Now, I knew he had a fast car. He had the Saab with a fuzzbuster, but that's not what he was talking about, of course. He had learned to fly. He'd gotten his pilot's license, and he had a plane. But anyway, on that Sunday in October, I gave him a call, and I said, I've got Chris Buckley here. He has to catch a plane from Nashville, and I'm clearly not going to make it. Can you come and get him? And he did. Came over where we were, picked up Buckley, got into the plane. Now, what I'd forgotten about my friend Chris Buckley, I think some of you know him. We talked to someone, is he's a fatalist. And he thought, I'm not going to make my plane. I am not meant to make my plane. And Jarman is interrupting the space-time continuum. But we got him to the plane, and then Wyatt came back, and he said, so what's happening with the car? I said, the car is not going to be ready till tomorrow, and so I'm going to have to figure out a way for Amy to come get me from Nashville, and I'll go back to Nashville, and then I'll come back. He said, no, come stay with us. And so I stayed with them. But one of the conditions of staying with them overnight was flying with Wyatt. I had to go fly with a guy who had just learned to fly. And I said to him, you do not want me on your plane. I'd been up all night hobnobbing with my fellow wizards. I said, you don't want me on your plane. My car just broke down. The timing belt broke. This is bad timing. No, we're gonna go fly. So we did. I got in his little plane, and in this little airport, which I believe is right over there, and he said, now, when I take off, I've got my headphones on. You must be very quiet. I said, I will. So we lifted right off above the flaming orange and red trees, and I said, oh, wow, this is pastoral. Wait. You have your version. I'm telling my version. I was just back from England where I had seen all of these poems were for real, not just imaginary, these pastoral poems. I said, this is pastoral. He says, I said, bucolic. We both agree. I said, Oh, wow. And we flew around the campus. One of the most beautiful experiences of flight, the most beautiful experience of flight I have ever had. And in the 30 years since then, I have cherished that memory and have enjoyed the times. They have welcomed me and my family to this amazing place. So I want to begin by thanking him for that, thanking him for his version of the story. And I'm going to begin with a poem which has an aerial view, a poem I think I read the first time I was at Sewanee in 1991. This is a poem about growing up in Southern California, surfing on Santa Monica Bay, and listening to, no matter what they tell you, there's someone around here, there's a poet abroad who would say, we all listen to the Beach Boys. No. We listen to Motown. We listen to the Supremes. Yes. In Ball's Market, after surfing till noon, we stand in wet trunks shivering as icing dissolves off our sweet rolls inside the heat-blued counter oven. When they appear on his portable TV, riding a float of chiffon as frothy as the peeling curl of a wave. The parade MC talks up their hits and their new houses outside of Detroit, and old Ball clicks his tongue. Gloved up to their elbows, their hands raised toward us, palm out, they sing, stop in the name of love, and don't stop, but slip into the lower foreground. Every day of a summer can turn from one moment into a single day. I saw Diana Ross in her first film play a brief scene by the Pacific, and that was the summer it brought back. Mornings we paddled out. The waves would be little more than embellishments, lathe work and spun glass, gray-green with cold but flawless. When the sun burned through the light fog, they would warm and swell, wind-scaled and ragged, and radios up and down the beach would burst on with her voice. She must remember that summer somewhat differently. And so must the two who sang with her in long matching gowns, standing a step back on her left and right as the camera tracked them into our eyes in Ball's Market. But what could we know? Tanned white boys, wiping sugar and salt from our mouths and leaning forward to feel their song. Not much, except to feel it, ravel us up like a wave in the silk of white water, simply, sweetly, repeatedly, and just as quickly let go. We didn't stop either, which is how we vanished too, parting like spray. Ball's Market, my friends and I. Dredgers ruined the waves, those continuous dawn perfections, and Ball soared high to the high rises cresting over them. His flight out of LA, heading for Vegas, would have banked above the wavering lines of surf. He may have seen them. I have. Leaving again for points north and east, glancing down as the plane turns. From that height they look frail and frozen, full of simple sweetness and repetition. So I have a friend who knew Berry Gordy and read the poem to Berry Gordy, father of Motown. I said, you read this poem to Berry Gordy? What did he think? He said, he thought it was okay. It's okay. I'm going to read some poems from a book of prose poems called Epistles that I wrote. And the epistles are loosely based on the New Testament letters and epistles of St. Paul and others. They are not, however, like his, often prescriptive. They simply try to follow a metaphor. And I think of these these poems as being like pastoral odes. So I think I'm going to read two of them. One is called In the Clouds. Simply by thinking I stood among the clouds, they surrounded and passed me, being and becoming. Blood released into clear water, breath into cold air. Formlessness entering form, forced into form. Breathing felt huge, then smaller than a cell. And I thought, don't the clouds themselves feel ambivalent between heaven and earth, hardly more substantial than their shadows? They come into being as randomly as we do, and they disintegrate. They go. What is the lifespan of a cloud? We want to float among them, loving the colossal, shot through with crooked pins of fire, towering side by side. How did I get up there? I was thinking about changing my life and wanted to talk to a cloud, since clouds are always changing, and the cloud said, how long has it been since you felt completely happy? Because you are always dissatisfied, always disappointed. It has been a long time. Talk to us. We are admired and disparaged. We are less than everything you compare us to, except nothingness. We are not nothing. Talk to us. Our silence, like the new shapes we are forever assuming, will be sympathetic. In the clouds, you will understand yearning as you never have and come back to earth changed. Who knows how? Surrender your skin, your bones, but we will not hold you up. We are as ineffectual as cattle, turning our white faces beside the road to watch you spin out of control. Placid as the love of God. Fall out of the sky, go sliding down the icy face of the air, we will watch. A little lightning might flicker in a distant bulb of fiberglass. Come to us as the exhalation of your speech, the spirit trapped inside your webs of flesh torn free. We are the embodiment of detachment. You know us best when we are most distant, and you are least afraid, when we are most moving, and you are unmoved. Brothers and sisters, consider the taste of cloud in a Sherpa's mouth, of fog in a surfer's throat. Consider the flocculent muscle of the cumulus, the icy elevation of the cirrus, but especially the thunderhead, full of zeal, hurrying in with its beveled wind, white, slanting rain, its electric personality, its aftermath. Consider how the clouds predict one another and how they break up, pulling a new body behind them. The farmer's wide open perspective, the office worker's sidelong glimpse, weeks of drab overcast, a single afternoon of separate sail-white drifters. Clouds flat and dull as lampblack, clouds with the contours of the brain, clouds like sheets of paper. I have read that even in an empty sky there exists water vapor enough to make a cloud, belief enough to make a God. As they change, clouds grow neither better nor worse. They alter because it is their nature to alter. They can fill us with joy or cast a stagnant sorrow over our days. Such is life under the clouds. In the clouds it is different. But if we live in the clouds, we have to take the earth with us. And this is for the birders. You know who you are. I know who you are, for Sydney and Terry, and the others of us who will be joining at the crack of dawn, Jim Peters, I think on Wednesday morning, to go look at birds. This is called For the Birds. When you wake up, raising the film over your eyes in a hollow of boughs or bark, you are always hungry, and you all talk at once. Each twig has an opinion and holds a singing fabric sewn with discussions of lice, offspring, height above ground, eyesight, mates, one-night stands, best routes to Canada once the warm weather comes, the taste of this bug, that bug, spittle needed to mat human hair, mud's pliancy, the housework of the sky. We think that none of you has an insight into the afterlife, but you all remember birth and the cramped, translucent dark before the breakout. I am bored. I need birds. Not flight, but activity. not serene detachment sailing, but intense engagement hunting. Look me in the eyes, frontal, head-on, and I admire you. Study me askance, and I adore you, even the moa in the museum case, the trinket hanging from the Christmas tree. In curious witnesses, feathers dabbled in blood, poking your noses in the wounded hands and feet. What did St. Francis tell you? Be yourselves, little ones, and you will praise God. For how many of us were you the first word? Trouble sleeping, I think of you in the netted aviary. There among reaching fronds and green blades, you hovered at my sister's washed floating hair, patient to take a single sand-colored strand that, buoyed by static, reached out half limp to be taken. She felt it go with a little cry when the root broke from its anchor of scalp skin. And this morning, there's an oil smear on the sliding glass door to the patio, and in it, dangling gray breast feathers, 5 of them, like milkweed fluff. One of you caromed off the hard sky and left this pattern, as precise as fish scales, scalloped on the glass like a record in rock, Veronica's napkin, the shroud of Turin. Woodpeckers, hairy or downy, red-bellied, pileated, flickers, cardinals, brown thrashers, a single rose-breasted grosbeak, once a tumbling flock of drunken cedar waxwings chirping like crickets, red-tailed hawks with breasts like lampshades, great horned owls conversing at dawn. In January, screech owls in their red faces, mockingbirds copying mockingbirds, chimney swifts back from Peru to the same elementary school chimney, kingbirds on power lines, bluebirds in pairs, blue jays in gangs, to be a man who surrounds his house with birds, to be a woman visited by wings, to say to the turkey vulture overhead, sister, to say brother to the starling and the swirling flock. If your call and response first thing in the morning make us hold hands and smile in the dark as we lie in bed, it's because we're not alone in the world. And when letters like this one are written, it is because we are. So, one of the things that happens that's interesting in the wisdom books of the Bible, Ecclesiastes, Proverbs, and the other one, there's a moment where Solomon is dishing out his wisdom and advice, but throughout Proverbs, but then he breaks into song. And the way he sings has always intrigued me, so I tried to do an imitation that would be really as secular as he is. So there's a moment in Proverbs where he says, or the author of Proverbs says, 3 things are too wonderful for me, for I do not understand the way of an eagle in the sky, the way of a serpent on a rock, the way of a ship on the high seas, the way of a man with a maiden. 3 things are too wonderful for me, for I do not understand. 5 fill me with awe, 6 I love. Our souls awake, our bodies awake, the envelope of our tension, the arcing cry of release, the silence of the house at night, the deep sleep of our children. 3 things are too wonderful for me, for I do not understand. The child fading in the face bones, appetite and failure becoming distinct in the face, aging, its lightness and heaviness, floating away, sinking, and the inner solitude, the hermit brain, the heart like a recluse. Most primitive, most original, first, as blind with ego as a baby's fist, the heart takes hold of speech. It takes and holds the word heart and the thought, making both feel their own pulse, their heart's life. 3 things wake me in the night, 4 things at 3 a.m. Her absence from my side, the sealing of time like an eyelid, a child talking in sleep, the close knocking of a narrow space. 3 things erase the future. 4 make the past a dream, the entrance of God into history, the knowledge that now he is caught, the temporary perfection of lovers fitting together, going on and on for a moment, and the memory of that moment. This is the way with daily life. From waking to sleeping is like this. Morning rising lighter than air, and at midday a shift, a tilting. Then the descent through clouds, the desire for another body, and foundation again, weight of the earth's core. 3 things are too wonderful for me, 4 I do not understand. The aching fabric of desire, the firmness head to foot of the absent one you need, the light her body is made of, the gravity of light. 3 things name God. 4 establish God's presence. The inner voice saying, live. The outer voice saying, live. The voice saying, oh my God, at the abrupt stoppage of time, and repeating like a psalm, my whole body is moving. Now, as Mark Twain once said, familiarity doesn't breed contempt, it breeds children. So I'm going to read you some poems about my children. If they were here, these would be the poems that I would embarrass them with. But they're grown women now. I don't get to do that. I used to do that here. They'd be there. And I was remembering with Margot, one of them was sitting by Margot once when I read one of these poems, and she said, I hate it when you read this. So this is a poem about my oldest when she was little. And I realized there's a point where I mentioned my own age. And I looked at this and I thought, oh my God. It's not just about her, it's about me. I couldn't imagine living beyond that august age of 30. This is poem in June. Actually, she was born in May. My daughter is, my daughter is riding out after rain in the undercast light of sunset, when the great ash a block away, studded with grackles like fleas, turns for an instant a color worth a long meditation on heartbreak. I stop, and astride my shoulders she gasps and sinks fingers into my hair. I had a lot of hair then. A huge head of hair. So I saved the speech I might have made to my 2-year-old daughter, saying instead, look at the tree, how many blackbirds? And feel the root-tearing grip in my hair relax as she trusts me again and responds, look at it, how many blackbirds? I count, rolling my shoulders to steady her. And she trills the numbers off her tongue and keeps counting, looping ahead and back. Sequence is a thread of grass. And the years before she was born and the years she will outlive her parents and be herself outlived can be woven to make, however tangled, one network of time to hold this moment. So an odd slant of light turns a tree of new leaves, the color of fall. 3 birds perched there like an October day. So today, 30, I can say how long it takes to grow up. When she is ready, as children do, she will decide how I lived. Now she is riding, and for her, as she cups my ears and points my face, I am a good horse. At the oily creek, I watch for fat water moccasins and set her down at the edge. I claw rocks from mud, and she pitches them sidearm, underhand, in chance arcs. They land at her feet, clattering on shingle, and they hit home, splashing crowns briefly clear from the black surface. And this is a poem for our second child. It is based in form and sort of theme on a great poem by Robert Graves called To Juan at Winter Solstice. And for Graves, there is only one story that the poem ultimately tells, and if you know something about its poetics, you know it's the story of the muse, whether the muse was present or not. In this case, I will refer to the one story that won't be told, and I think you'll understand that it's clear that half of her family originated in, they were Jews who got out of Russia or Poland ahead of the Tsar, and a whole village of them disappeared in the Holocaust. So this is called To Zoe Beginning Winter. And the quote from Robert Graves, there's one story and one story only. The ground hard as a board this morning thrusts up glassy nails in the garden. She's born near the winter solstice, I should mention that. The spikes of frozen humus tipped with frost. The gaudy proof of spring that life is joy bides its time dully, deeply. In the warmth of the house, still you dress for summer. You were born for glamour in this season, for darkened eyebrows, lipstick, outlandish hats, to trail a filmy scarf through air and weave the dance of a 5-year-old around your parents, to klezmer music, jazz, Beach Boys, Broadway show tunes, opera. There is one story that won't be told here. Skip this part until you can imagine in another winter your cousins in the shifting ground of Poland finding it hard to live. Thinking of them, we always think of winter. There is one story that won't be told here, and that is dying of cold. Coming in from the cold, your cheeks spice the air. One eyebrow arches with your sense of drama, calling for tears or laughter. We can't tell until you laugh or cry. A little bit of history is passing. The age of your flamboyance burns brightly in your face and in our faces, now as the sun is born again and rises, not like a resurrection in glory all at once, but warily. And when they were little, Amy would be directing a church choir, so she'd be off, and I would get them ready for church by dressing them, which I learned to do. And of course, growing up, as I did, going to church every Sunday, and we all sort of included, we would do this. I tried to dress the girls in the nicest clothes they had, not always with their cooperation. So this is called dressing my daughters. One girl a full head taller than the other, into their Sunday dresses. First the slip, hardly a piece of fabric, softly stitched and printed with a bud. I'm not their mother. And tangle and untangle the whole cloth on backward, have to grab it around their necks, but they know how to pull arms in, a reflex of being dressed, and also a child's faith. The mass of stuff that makes the Sunday frocks collapses in my hands and finds its shape only because they understand the drape of it, these skinny keys to intricate locks. The buttons are a problem for a surgeon. How would she connect these bony valves and stubborn eyelets? The filmy dress revolves in my blind fingers, the slots work one by one. And when they're put together, not like puppets, or those doll saints that bring tears to true believers, but living children, somebody's real daughters, they do become more real. They say, stop it and give it back, and I don't want to. They'll kiss a doll's hard features, whispering, I'm sorry. I know just why my mother used to worry. Your clothes don't keep you close. It's nakedness. Clad in my boots and holster, I would roam with my 6-gun buddies. We dealt fake death to one another, fell and rolled in filth and rose, grimy with wounds, then headed home. But Sunday, what was that tired explanation? given for wearing clothes that scratched and shone and weighed like a slow hour, that we should shine in gratitude. So I give that explanation, undressing them and wait for the result. After a day like Sunday, such a long one, when they lie down half dead, to be undone, they won't help me. They cry, it's not my fault. So in the 90s, when they were beginning to be teenagers, and the century was coming to an end, I wrote a poem that also was an acknowledgement of Yeats's great poem, Prayer for My Daughter, in which he gives her all kinds of advice of how she would be, which we know he himself never took, but advised that she take. So I thought I would give advice to my daughters that I never took, but I hope that they would take. This is called Prayer for Our Daughters, and it is a hope for the new century, which we are now well into. May they never be lonely at parties or wait for mail from people they haven't written, or still in middle age ask God for favors, or forbid their children things they were never forbidden. May hatred be like a habit they never developed and can't see the point of, like gambling or heavy drinking. If they forget themselves, may it be in music or the kind of prayer that makes a garden of thinking. May they enter the coming century like swans under a bridge into enchantment, and take with them enough of this century to assure their grandchildren it really happened. May they find a place to love without nostalgia for someplace else that they can never go back to. And may they find themselves, as we have found them, complete at each stage of their lives, each part they add to. May they be themselves long after we've stopped watching. May they return from every kind of suffering, except the last which doesn't bear repeating, and be themselves again, both blessed and blessing. So I'm going to read a poem about my mother, a poem about my father, and then a final poem. So the poem about mother is a poem that comes with an epigraph from the Aeneid. And I had the audacity to print this in Latin, which I don't know how to pronounce. I remember I was about to read this once, and I was with Alicia, and I said, "Do you know how to pronounce this?" She told me. I can't remember, but it basically is a description of the way, in this case, Venus is dressed with a skirt that is knotted over her smooth knee, something like that. In the Aeneid, a point comes where Aeneas comes to Libya. He will eventually make it to Carthage, but he doesn't know where he is. And his mother is Venus. And she comes to him in disguise to help him find his way. So this is called Encounter. Aeneas, lost in the Libyan forest, met his mother Venus and thought she was some girl out hunting with Diana. Virgil describes her naked knee, her flowing garment hitched up by a knot. She offered directions and assurance, distracting beauty. You wonder how the hero could go on. Pious Aeneas, he was preoccupied, but as she sped away, he knew her and cried out. I meet my mother in her youth whenever I see her old. Isn't this the way with everyone we've loved all our lives? Endowed with sunlight, her gaze like a bow ready to fire. And then the bow becomes her sturdy walker, her gaze clouds. A California girl she has thrown on a patio dress and waits for me on her long sofa out of breath. She wonders if it's I she's seen now, that son of hers, as if I, not she the goddess, or the one disguised. I was very moved, as I'm sure everyone who heard his reading, by Pete's story about his father's informing him about his weak personality and responding to his father about his determination to write poetry. Very struck, very moved. I have a story like that. Although my father had acknowledged pretty early on that I was going to write poetry, that I was meant to be a poet. But the other thing I was going to do was that I was going to follow him into the ministry. I was going to be a preacher like Dad. I'd write poetry on the side. I'd go to college. I'd study something that would help me be a preacher. I'd go to seminary, and I'd do that. And a night or two before I went off for college, he said, Mark, being a preacher isn't just standing up on Sunday and reading the sermon and leading the service. You're a pastor too. You have a community of people. You have to like people. All kinds of people. And you don't. But the other thing that he knew was that I had for a few years at that point been sneaking books of poetry into church to read. And on one occasion, because I was on the executive board for the Christian Youth Fellowship of Southern California, we were at a big convention. He was on the dais with his fellow preachers. And my group, my CYF executive board, was supposed to make a presentation, but I had hidden in the balcony, and I was reading William Blake. And he found me up there. And he apparently said to the guy by him, "See that boy up there? That's my son. He's reading poetry." So this is called In Church with Hart Crane. There are some lines from Hart Crane in here. I think you'll know which ones they are. They're really good. In Church with Hart Crane. This white Doubleday anchor book with the fuchsia pink M of the Brooklyn Bridge on the cover was my prayer book in a church without prayer books. I sat in the back shadows knowing God could see, and so could my father speaking in the pulpit, and I read. It was a kind and northern face, and liked that one, and liked Repose of Rivers even more, as the singing river lost itself, hearing wind flaking sapphire in the sea beyond the dikes. There was a sea beyond the holy space behind my father's back, beyond the baptistry that cupped its portion, unsalty, tepid, blessed to rinse off sin. A block away, the Pacific swarmed with its rivers, and the wind really did flake sapphire and emerald and ruby, names of streets. And in my hands the white book hummed. There was poetry equal to its voices in the drabbed hymnal slotted in the pew and in my father's sinuous braid of sentences, but I wouldn't know that for years. He wanted me to be good. I wanted to write a poem as good as Repose of Rivers, as my grandmother's love letters, as Black Tambourine, the three I thought I understood. How many awful times. I've sat in church since then believing that I was neither good nor good enough to write the poems I thought I understood. With Christ invisible on his bloodless cross, with Crane dissolved in the spindrift a block away, I read in church and couldn't imagine either one seated beside me in his fishy clothes, putting a salty finger on the page saying, "Read this one again, you haven't gotten it." The most important person in the room among the visible was robed and large and knew what I was doing, reading poetry, and didn't say a word. I would remember. I have remembered. And in my classrooms, ignore the sleeping boys and girls and the waking dreamers turning toward the window like sunflowers while some conspiring phantom like Hart or Jesus drifts past, beckoning. The book still falls open to those poems. the ones I bowed my head to as if in prayer, asking to be a river, a love letter, a black tambourine. So I'm going to end with this poem. It's not too terribly long, I hope at this point. My wife and I grew up in Los Angeles, and now that we have a daughter who lives there, we try to get back as often as we can. We have an excuse. Los Angeles is undergoing what all great big cities undergo, various kinds of decay, and then revitalization. This is about seeing something that I found amazing in Los Angeles this last Christmas when we were staying in Silver Lake near where our daughter lives. Anyway, I have to ask you if you know a camp song that goes, I love the mountains, I love the rolling hills, I love the flowers, I love the daffodils. Okay, that's enough. It's rolling through this. This is called Overpass Iv. It is full of all kinds of illusions. I'm not going to explain any of them. I love the ivy dangling from the LA overpass. The long ropes of dark leaves hanging still, and the tough old vines embracing the concrete pillars. Shadows gather, layering older shadows, and cars hurrying beneath. People look up a moment at the relics as if Wordsworth's River Wye, and not the dilapidated abbey downstream, were the ruin to be cherished. I cherish the ruins of home. The churches my father built and served, and his father sold to new businesses, the schoolyards and neighborhood backyards, the congregations of tight-knit communities, all treated as tear-downs, purpose-driven deaths to bring forth new spaces, new values for the soul's real estate, new ways of traveling to a different life. America is full of ruins, said Randall Jarrell, the ruins of hopes. But home is a kind of hope, and hope can be restored in memory. Coleridge must have dreamed of the River Otter, winding in a mazy motion through his childhood, and remade it as the sacred Alf. I saw that one evening in Ottery St. Mary, looking toward the channel. That need to remake already stirs in the swollen urge crossing the Aegean as a bombed street lives again in a bombed heart. We will cross gulfs of space for a new foothold that may allow us time to dream of return in song, in story, but never in person. Every memory of home is an origin story. It may be Eden we miss, but also before Eden, that garden yet to be imagined, filled with lives which would make our lives. The strands of Overpass ivy hang straight down, slenderer but as heavy as Isambard Kingdom Brunel's massive chain links, the industrial triumph now declining in rusty stillness, the whole earth a broken breathing, St. Stephen pelted with clods of smoke. The weather forecast collapses like a telescope. All that seems so far away now fits in a palm which we fit inside, the closing and secreting fist of a sea anemone, where the tide pool encrusts its foundations as if a shrine once stood there, and now stands again inverted, its gargoyle barnacles opening tenderlessly in hunger. It is always back to the sea. And now the sea responds, accepting the invitation to rinse and cleanse and undermine itself with the poisons it will add to its home brew. It is why we inquire if a knob of rock catching sunlight in the Kuiper Belt, if it was from Abyssinia, Alexandria, Anaheim, the moon, if it knew the moon and earth when they were young, if it can speak for a particular comet carrying water, like Gunga Din, to sprinkle some imperial throat near the heart, cratered but still at work. Ruins always tell us they were a place once, and we dig them up, hurtling at the speed of a brush tip to sip dust from the imprint of a shell. The stranded vines cling to the concrete, a hanging garden of Babylon, colossal wreck, and local antique breakdown, still in the windless motion below the traffic. Perhaps they meant to pull it all down, then saw from another angle the seductive cascade, neither an invitation to nor a caution against going up or coming down, not a yes or not a no, and left it for others to notice, witness, and marvel at among the hills of Silver Lake near the ancient reservoir. Boom diada, boom diada, boom. Thank you.